The drums beat long into the night, echoing through the baobab trees like a heartbeat beneath the stars. The village of Ire was alive with song, laughter, and the shimmer of firelight dancing across brightly dyed fabrics and oiled skin. It was a wedding, the grandest the village had seen in years, and every household had sent their finest. The feast was abundant. Plates overflowed with roasted goat, sweet yam paste, and spiced groundnut stew, all glistening with the sheen of celebration. But beneath the music, beneath the laughter, something stirred. A heaviness in the air, a strange chill despite the fire's heat. It started with a child. A small girl, no older than 6, reached for a piece of fried plantain from the platter before her. As her fingers brushed the edge of the plate, she stopped. Her eyes widened. The laughter in her throat caught and curled back down into silence. She lifted her hand and the crowd around her froze. A thin streak of crimson ran across her fingertips. Her mother leaned over, confused, until she too saw it. The mark on the plate. Blood. A single line, bright as a fresh wound, etched across the center of the dish like it had been painted there. They wiped it. It returned. Another guest lifted their bowl, the same mark. Then another. And another. Dozens of plates streaked with red. Not spilled wine. Not a cooking mistake. Blood. Unmistakable. Fresh. And on every plate. Voices rose in confusion, then fear. Someone dropped their calabash of palm wine and began to scream. A man stood, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with something between guilt and terror before he collapsed into the sand. A woman clawed at her face, shrieking about voices in the food. The village elder tried to calm them, but his tongue swelled in his mouth and choked his words into a gargle. One by one the wedding guests began to fall, some trembling, some weeping, some babbling to no one. Only the wind spoke clearly. She has returned. The words crept from the mouths of the old women seated near the fire, their eyes clouded with knowing. One of them, bent with time and wrapped in white cloth, pointed a bony finger toward the feast. Her blood will not be ignored. Then the drumming stopped. The dancers froze. Even the fire seemed to flicker less boldly, like it too feared the truth taking shape. And from the shadow of the trees came the faintest laugh. Soft, set, like a child's memory. Not all recognized the name as it passed through the murmurs. But some did. Just before the chaos, just before the collapse, there had been a girl. A girl with quiet eyes and an herbal scent. The girl who had served them all. The one who never came back from the kitchen that night. Era rose with the sun, as she did every morning, long before the cock's crow stirred the rest of the compound. The dew still clung to the grass, the air cool and quiet, save for the rustle of palm fronds in the breeze. She moved barefoot across the courtyard, careful not to wake anyone, her hands already busy with the day's first task, fetching herbs from the small garden her mother had planted years ago. Lemongrass, bitter leaf, uziza, and the white-flowered agua she used for fever. She knew the plants as one knows old friends, not just by scent and shape but by their stories. Her mother used to tell her that every leaf has a name, and every root remembers who pulls it. She whispered to them as she gathered, soft words in the old tongue, the one her mother had spoken in secret when she thought no one was listening. But Era always listened. 17 now, Era had grown into a tall, willowy girl with quiet eyes and strong, work-worn hands. She moved like wind over water, silent, unseen, but always present. The villagers called her Ghost Child, not out of cruelty, but because she drifted through life as if her feet never quite touched the ground. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her voice carried the gentleness of running water. Her mother had once said that some flames burn without smoke, and Era was one of them. Since her mother's death, the house had changed. The laughter that once filled its walls had long since faded. Her stepmother, Ian, had wasted no time reshaping the compound in her image, cold, sharp, orderly. Where her mother's laughter had once echoed, now only commands and scorn lived. Ian's 2 daughters, Adjua and Bisola, delighted in tormenting Era. They called her names, mocked her silence, and made her clean the floor with her own clothes when the rags disappeared. But Era never fought back. Not out of weakness, but out of something deeper. A quiet resolve that came from watching the moon no matter how often the clouds tried to cover it. She had her herbs, her quiet corners, her whispered memories of her mother. And she had Tay. She never spoke of him. Not to anyone. Not even in the privacy of her thoughts. But her eyes always found him when he passed, bow slung across his back, skin shining with the sweat of the hunt, his laugh like dry leaves crunching beneath steady boots. Tay was kind, always kind, especially to her. Once, when Adjua accidentally spilled boiling water on Era's leg, It was Tay who brought a healing root and bound it in clean cloth, even as Ian scowled from the doorway. He said nothing then, just smiled and pressed a kola nut into Era's hand. For strength, he'd said. That kola nut still sat beneath her mat, wrapped in cloth. But now Tay was betrothed to Adjua. It had been announced just 3 weeks ago, during the moon's first crescent. The whole village had gathered. Drums, dancing, jollof rice in heavy pots, and palm wine that flowed like rivers. Adjua preened like a peacock in her new beads, her voice loud, laughter shrill. Tay had smiled politely, but his eyes, just for a flicker, had found Era's across the fire. And she had looked away. She did not cry. She hadn't cried since the day her mother died. It wasn't allowed. Ian had said tears made the spirits restless. But Era's silence was deeper than obedience. It was survival. Her father, once a man of laughter and songs, now sat like a shadow in the far corner of the courtyard, lips forever tight, eyes lost in places no one else could see. Since marrying Ian, he had become a ghost of himself, speaking only when necessary and never about the past. He watched everything even when he pretended not to. But he never interfered. Not when they beat Era. Not when they made her sleep by the fire pit. Not when they took her mother's beads and wore them like trophies. That morning, as Era boiled leaves for a sick child in the village, her thoughts drifted like steam from the pot. She stirred with a carved stick her mother had left her, its handle worn smooth from years of use. She had dreams, not of marriage, not of revenge, not even of Tay. She dreamed of being a healer like her mother. Of traveling between villages with bundles of herbs tied to her back and stories in her mouth. Of whispering to the sick and watching their eyes clear. Of being remembered not as the girl who was quiet, but as the woman who made pain go away. But dreams are fragile in a house full of knives. And in that house, Era was never more than a pair of hands and a name that no one said kindly. Still she burned. Quietly. Bittersweet and slow. A gentle flame no one cared to see, until it touched the wrong heart. It happened on a sun-drenched afternoon, the kind where the earth seemed to sleep under the weight of the heat. The compound was unusually quiet, save for the lazy buzzing of flies and the occasional clatter of a wooden bowl against stone. Era was crouched near the fire pit, grinding dried pepper into a fine dust when she heard Ian's voice rise, sharp and self-satisfied. Everyone gather. We have an announcement. Era's hand paused mid-motion. She glanced toward the veranda where Ian stood tall, wrapped in bright yellow cloth, her beaded headdress catching the sun. Adjua and Bisola flanked her like smug shadows, their faces twisted in identical grins. Even her father emerged from the back room, his steps slow and uncertain, as if pulled by invisible strings. Adjua held a carved gourd, painted in gold leaf, the traditional vessel for betrothal. Her smile was too wide. I will be marrying Tay, son of Chief Aidwol, in 7 days, she declared, raising the gourd. Gasps and exclamations burst around the courtyard, carried on the hot wind. Let it be known throughout Iray, the feast will be the greatest this village has seen in a decade. Ian added. Era's fingers dug into the pepper paste until her nails burned. Her head dropped and she fought to still the tremble in her chest. She knew this day would come. She had told herself again and again that Tay was not hers to dream about. But the finality of it, spoken aloud, celebrated, written in fire across the sky, struck like a spear to the gut. Adjua turned, eyes locked on Era. You'll cook, of course, she said, smugness laced in every syllable. We can't risk the village eating anything substandard. Ian added sweetly, and you'll serve too. You are the most practiced in the kitchen. There was laughter then, harsh and mocking. Era nodded once, lips pressed into a line and returned to grinding. That evening, as dusk stretched long fingers across the sky, Ian approached Era with a list of dishes, not written but recited slowly, deliberately. Some were common, egusi soup, yam pottage, peppered snail. But others were rare, old things, dishes that hadn't graced tables since Era's mother was alive. Use agua leaf for the fish, Ian said casually. And that root your mother used to use? The bitter one that smelled like wet stone. Era looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. That one causes dreams. Yes, Ian said, smiling faintly. But only in small doses. Too much and it causes silence. Era's heart pounded. She also used the red seeds for stew, remember? Ian continued, not missing a beat. The ones you found behind the shrine. You still gather them, yes? Yes. Good. I want every dish to carry a touch of your mother's legacy. She may be gone, but her hands live in yours. Her smile widened. Let's make her proud. Era said nothing. But in her chest something coiled tight. Later that night, Era knelt before her mother's old garden patch. The moon was a pale smear above her, the stars quiet. She dug into the earth, pulling out roots and leaves, her fingers practiced, her heart numb. She remembered her mother's voice teaching her which herbs soothed coughs, which banished fever, and which ones whispered too loudly in a person's blood. Her mother had called it medicine with memory. As Era worked, her thoughts twisted. The wedding was to be held here, in this very courtyard, the place where her mother had collapsed one rainy evening and never stood again. The elders had called it a fever of the spirits. But Era had seen the signs, the tight jaw, the pale lips, the way her mother's eyes locked on Ian before her final breath. She had always suspected. Now the same courtyard would host Adjua's wedding to the only person who ever looked at Era like she mattered. The same ground would echo with the feet of dancers celebrating the girl who made her life a chamber of ash. The injustice curled inside her like a living flame. The week passed in a blur of preparations. Drummers came from neighboring villages. Cloth merchants brought the finest silks. Ian spared no expense. Adjua paraded through the compound in new beads every day, tossing insults like stones. "Make sure the rice is soft," she'd sneer. "We don't want the guests to think you cook like your cursed mother." On the sixth night, Era overheard a conversation between Adjua and Ian. They were in the storeroom, voices lowered but cruel. "Are you sure it'll work?" Adjua asked. "She will taste everything before the guests eat." "It's tradition," Ian replied. "And you know her. She obeys." "What if she doesn't?" "She will. She always does." That night, Era lay awake beside the dying fire, her hands tucked beneath her thin wrap. She stared at the wooden beams of the ceiling, feeling each crack like a vein beneath her skin. They were going to poison her. Not quickly. Not messily. But slowly through the same dishes she had been taught to perfect. A final insult, death by the memory of her own mother. But Era would not run. She would not scream or protest. She would do as they asked. She would cook. She would serve. But something else would simmer beneath the fire. Something no one had tasted before. The morning of the wedding was silent and breathless, as if the very air knew what was coming. Birds refused to sing. Even the wind avoided the compound. The trees stood still, listening. Era rose before the sky had turned blue, her hands already moving through the rhythm of duty. She pounded yam in silence, stirred pepper stew with focus, and layered banana leaves over the smoked fish. Her eyes were dry. Her heart heavier than stone. The courtyard, once her childhood playground, had been transformed. Colorful cloths lined the walls, and an arch made of palm fronds curved over the entrance. At the center, a great fire crackled, flames licking a large clay pot, the main broth for the feast. It was to be the bride's offering, the welcoming dish, served to elders, in-laws, and the groom himself. Era prepared it with steady hands, adding leaves, oils, and spices as instructed. But there was no joy in it, no spirit. Only duty. And something else, something darker, threaded between the herbs as if the broth itself knew it was part of a sacrifice. By midday the compound pulsed with life. Drummers arrived, their rhythms loud and bright. Guests in bright wrappers flowed in like a tide. The scent of roasted goat and fried plantain curled through the air. Era stood in the shade of the kitchen hut, wiping her hands on her wrapper when Ian entered, her voice honeyed and sharp. "You've done well," she said, eyes gleaming. "Very well. But there is one final thing." Era said nothing, waiting. "You will taste each dish," Ian continued, stepping closer. "We cannot risk any guest falling ill. You understand." Era's breath caught, but she nodded. Adjua and Bisola entered next, dressed in shimmering white and gold, their wrists stacked with coral bangles. Adjua sneered. "The last time your food made someone sick, we nearly lost the chief's son. That had never happened." Ian clapped her hands. "Start with the stew." A small wooden spoon was thrust into Era's hand. The dishes were lined on a woven mat, each one steaming gently. Her palms trembled, but she began. One spoonful of the egusi. Warm, heavy, familiar. A taste of the yam porridge. Slightly oversalted, Adjua's fault, but no one would say so. She swallowed roasted plantain dipped in palm oil. Her throat was already tightening. "Keep going," Ian urged. Bisola smirked. "It's tradition, sister. Show your gratitude." Dish by dish Era tasted. Her stomach churned. The food was no longer food, it was memory, it was silence, it was venom and velvet. And then came the last one. The main broth. It was thick, dark red from crushed seeds and ground bark. Steam spiraled from its surface like ghost breath. She dipped the spoon, lifted it slowly, and let it touch her lips. The moment it slid down her throat she knew. The fire came first, a slow burn at the back of her mouth, which then slid down her neck like boiling oil. Then came the cold, a sudden drop in her chest as though her lungs had swallowed snow. Her knees buckled. She reached out, caught the edge of the table and steadied herself. No one moved. Adjua laughed. I think she finally tasted her own cooking. Era looked up, her eyes wide, pupils shrinking. The courtyard spun. The laughter of the guests twisted into groans. The sun above her fractured like broken glass. Tay stepped forward from the shadows near the gate. What's wrong with her? He asked, his voice low, concerned. No one answered. Era stumbled backward, knocking over a bowl. The stew spilled into the sand. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gulps. Her vision blurred, then doubled. The faces around her melted into each other, monstrous and unfamiliar. She looked to her father. He stood at the far side of the courtyard, near the irako tree, watching. His face was blank. His arms crossed. Her mouth opened, no sound. Then the convulsions began. She dropped to her knees, the spoon clattering to the ground. Her body jerked violently once, then again. Her fingers clawed at her throat, seeking breath that would not come. The guests began to murmur. She's sick. She's possessed. No, someone whispered, she's poisoned. Tay tried to move toward her, but Adjua grabbed his arm. It's none of your business. He hesitated just for a second. Era's head tilted back as she gasped, her mouth frothing. Her body collapsed sideways, hitting the clay pot. The broth spilled in a thick red arc, soaking into the sand. Her blood, too, followed, dripping from her lips, from her nose, trailing into the food like ink into water. And no one helped her. Not Ian, who watched with narrowed eyes. Not Bisola, who crossed her arms smugly. Not Adjua, who laughed once more before walking away. And not her father, who turned his back and walked toward the house. The last thing Era saw before the darkness took her was the sky, empty, cloudless, and the spoon still spinning slowly on the ground beside her. They waited until the guests had gone, until the drums fell silent and only the crackle of dying firewood remained. The stars blinked quietly overhead, unbothered by the sin below. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena laughed. Era's body lay on a woven mat, wrapped in one of Ian's old wrappers, not out of respect but to hide the blood. Her limbs were stiff now, her mouth slightly open, frozen mid-breath. Her hands had curled into tight fists. No one had closed her eyes. No one had wept. No one spoke her name. Ian led the procession, if it could be called that. Just her, Adjua, Bisola, and 2 boys from the next village, bribed with coins and palm wine to dig fast and ask no questions. They carried Era's body in silence, the mat swinging between them like a forgotten sack. No chants. No incense. No priest. She was never properly ours, Ian muttered. Better this way. They chose the far end of the compound where the ancient irako tree stood, tall and gnarled, older than memory. Its roots coiled across the earth like buried serpents, and its branches swallowed the moonlight whole. It was the place where the dead were sometimes whispered about but never buried. Superstition kept people away. But Ian liked that. No visitors. No witnesses. Here, she ordered. Quickly. The boys dug with trembling hands, the red earth groaning as the shovel blades bit deep. With each strike, dust flew and a strange, bitter scent rose, like crushed pepper and smoke. The ground was hard, too hard for this season. The dry months had baked it into stone. And yet, as they dug deeper, the soil grew damp. What? Almost pulpy. The boys paused. Keep going, Ian snapped. She must be beneath the roots. No one should find her. They obeyed. When the hole was deep enough to swallow a child, Era's body was lowered in. Her hair spilled out from the wrap, clinging to her cheeks. One of the boys muttered a quiet prayer. Ian slapped his arm. Enough. Cover it. And as the first handfuls of dirt struck her chest, the wind changed. It came fast, without warning. A gust, sharp and sudden, tearing through the trees and lifting dust in a spiral around the burial mound. The boys staggered back, shielding their eyes. Adjua cursed. Bisola dropped the lantern. Then came the rain. Thin at first like mist, then thicker. Heavy. Relentless. Adjua screamed, it's dry season. This isn't right. But the sky did not listen. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and deep like the growl of a sleeping god. Lightning cracked behind the clouds. Water drenched the wrappers of the women, soaked the earth, flooded the hole before it could be fully filled. The red soil turned to mud, swallowing the mat Era lay in. Finish it. Ian yelled over the roar. They shoveled frantically, burying her beneath wet clay and crumbling root. But none of them saw what happened below. Beneath the mud, beneath the mat, where her body touched the earth, Era's blood stirred. It did not soak and disappear. Moved. Thread-thin rivers of crimson slithered through the wet soil, winding along the tendrils of root. As if seeking. As if remembering. When it reached the base of the Irako, the roots pulsed once like something breathing. Then twice. Then began to glow. Faint like fireflies trapped in bark. A soft red shimmer, pulsing under the surface of the tree. Above, the rain slowed. The wind hushed. And something shifted. From the edge of the clearing, where the tall grass met the dark, came the soft flutter of wings. A white bird. Small. Still. Unmoving. It landed silently on the highest root, its feathers untouched by the rain, its eyes black as obsidian. It tilted its head and stared at the mound where Era lay, as if listening to something only it could hear. None of the others saw it. They were already leaving, stumbling through the mud, clutching their soaked wrappers and cursing the sky. Adjua muttered that they must burn something to cleanse the place. Bisola insisted on washing her feet with charcoal water. Ayn said nothing. Her face was tight. Her eyes locked on the tree just for a moment too long. The boys ran. No coins could keep them there. By the time the courtyard quieted, the mound was smooth and dark, the earth newly packed and steaming in the night air. The bird remained. Still. Patient. And beneath the roots, Era's body pulsed once. Only the earth felt it. The tree drank the last of her blood. And the roots remembered. From that night on, no one walked near the Irako tree. Not even in daylight. Not even the children who once played there. The air around it was different. The breeze colder. The ground never dry. But the bird remained. Waiting. The wedding morning dawned bright and heavy with heat. The sun rose like a coin in a pot of oil, slow and golden, casting its light across the thatched rooftops of Ire. Women bustled with last-minute preparations. Drummers stretched goatskin over drums. Men polished gourds of palm wine until they gleamed. All around the compound, voices chattered, feet hurried, beads clicked. Joy was expected. And joy was demanded. Adjua stood at the center of it all, draped in fine cloth the color of flame, gold beads dripping from her ears and wrists, her head adorned with a coral crown heavy enough to bend her neck. She smiled wide, her teeth sharp and perfect, her skin oiled to glow in the light. She looks like a goddess, someone whispered. A queen in the making, another agreed. No one spoke of Era. Not the elders, not the neighbors, not even the girls she once treated with herbs when their mothers were too poor for charms. Her name had been swept away like ash before the rain. Her absence like a room sealed shut. But her presence clung to the corners. The feast was laid out in the courtyard on long woven mats. Steaming bowls of pepper soup, grilled fish and banana leaves, honeyed plantains, and the thick red stew for which Era had been known. Guests praised the aroma, marveled at the spice, licked their fingers in delight. She outdid herself, one said without remembering who the she even was. Ayn floated through the crowd, laughter perfectly timed, her voice warm and commanding. Adjua followed, accepting compliments as though born to them. Bisola danced, a silk fan in her hand. Tay stood off to the side near the palm tree, dressed in deep green and brown. He looked like a hunter still in the forest. His face was set, unreadable. Every so often, his gaze wandered to the kitchen door, the space where Era should have emerged. His hands twitched. Something in his chest thudded too hard, too often. He had not seen her since that moment in the courtyard, her body jerking, the blood, the spoon falling. Ayn told him she had been taken away for treatment. A fainting spell, she said. Too much heat, poor thing. But she's resting now. Best she stay away from all the excitement. He wanted to believe it, but he couldn't. The guests began to eat. That's when the first one noticed it. A child, maybe 4 or 5, reached for a dumpling. She paused, stared, then pulled her hand back sharply. It's hot, she cried. But the food was not. Her mother touched the bowl and frowned. A thin red line had appeared on the rim of the plate. Like paint. But not paint. Blood. She rubbed it with her cloth. It smeared but didn't disappear. Strange, she murmured. At the next mat, an old man raised his bowl and stared into it. A streak of red curved along the inner edge. He blinked. Who bleeds from clay? He muttered, half to himself. Soon, murmurs moved like wind through tall grass. More plates. More bowls. The red mark repeating. Some said it was the dye from the cloth. Others blamed the firewood. But nothing explained why the streaks kept returning even after being wiped away. Then a dog barked. Not once but wildly, ears back, teeth bared. It had been licking the inside of a plate discarded near the entrance. When its owner reached to calm it, the dog turned and bit down on his wrist, drawing blood. Gasps rose. People backed away. Children began to cry. A young boy burst into tears after putting his fingers in the stew. "It burns," he sobbed. But his tongue was unscalded. The mood twisted slowly, like a string being pulled too tight. Laughter thinned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the drummers hesitated between beats. The food, once praised, sat untouched. Steam no longer inviting but accusatory. And above it all, unnoticed by most, sat the white bird. Perched on the roof of the kitchen hut, it watched in silence, eyes gleaming like polished stone. Its feathers, pure and still, did not ruffle with the wind. It did not blink. Tay finally moved toward the central table. He dipped his fingers into the broth Era had once stirred, lifted it to his lips, then stopped. It was cold. Not in temperature, but in sensation. Like swallowing river water in the middle of Harmattan. He shivered. Then came the ache in his stomach. It wasn't pain. Not yet. Just unease. A knowing. As if his body had remembered something his mind had been forced to forget. He looked around. No one smiled anymore. The celebration felt like a lie told too loudly. His gaze flicked upward, and met the eyes of the white bird. It tilted its head. A cold wave crawled up his spine. He opened his mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but no sound came. Then the wind shifted. And somewhere, beneath the table, beneath the earth, beneath the roots of a tree that should have remained silent, something stirred. A hush fell over the compound like a blade. The music had stopped entirely. No one danced. The food cooled, untouched. Guests shifted uneasily on their mats, eyes darting from one dish to another, as if the meals themselves had become strangers. The red streaks on the plates had darkened, not dried blood but something wetter, fresher, alive. They pulsed faintly, some said like veins just beneath skin. And then came the whispers. Faint at first, barely audible, like wind brushing through tall reeds. But they were not of the earth. They were voices. Soft. Weeping. Calling. Why did you let them? Help me. Please? A man dropped his calabash and leapt to his feet, eyes wide, chest heaving. Did you hear that? He cried. She spoke to me, she called my name. Others looked around in panic. An elder woman who had come from a neighboring village clutched her plate with shaking hands. The food weeps, she whispered, and then began to sob, rocking back and forth. Her daughter tried to calm her, but the woman only pointed into her bowl and said, "She's inside. She's inside." Ian stood frozen near the wedding arch, her hands clasped so tightly her rings bit into her fingers. She smiled too widely, too long, lips trembling. "This is just excitement," she said loudly. "The heat. Nothing more. Sit, eat." But no one sat. No one obeyed. Then a man near the center clutched his throat and coughed violently. His entire body convulsed forward as he dropped to his knees. When his mouth opened again, it wasn't a cry that came, but worms. Wet, white, writhing worms spilled from between his lips and splashed across the mat in front of him. Screams erupted. A girl fainted. Another man staggered and fell backward, his eyes rolling up. Blood foamed at his mouth. Children screamed. Mothers clutched them tightly, shielding their faces from bowls that now whispered and plates that seemed to bleed without end. And then Ian saw her. At first, just a flicker, a shadow at the edge of the crowd. Then again near the fish pot. Era in her torn wrap, her face streaked with blood, eyes hollow and glowing faintly red. Ian blinked. Era stood directly before her. "No," Ian hissed, backing away. "No. You're dead." Era said nothing. Ian turned and bolted toward the back of the compound, but every turn brought Era again, at the well, under the palm tree by the grinding stone. No matter where she looked, Era stood watching. The same silent gaze. The same broken serenity. Ian screamed and clawed at her head. "She's here. She won't leave me." Bisola rushed to her mother's side. "What are you talking about?" "She's everywhere." Ian shrieked. "She's inside the plates, inside my head." Adjua meanwhile had seen enough. The guests were either screaming, vomiting, or fleeing. The elders murmured prayers and drew protective symbols in the sand. The air smelled of pepper, sweat, and something foul, like rot. Adjua turned to run. She kicked off her sandals and made for the gate, lifting her skirts. But as she crossed the threshold of the courtyard, her wrapper suddenly caught. She stumbled. Then it began to smoke. She screamed, slapping at the fabric. The fire spread, though no torch had touched it. The fine white cloth turned black in seconds. Her veil ignited next, curling in on itself like dry leaves in flame. Her voice broke as she fell to her knees, slapping at her skin, screaming her own name. "She's burning me. She's burning me." No one helped. The guests only stared. Some ran. Some dropped to their knees and begged forgiveness from no one they could see. Tay stepped forward then, pushing through the chaos. He walked slowly, deliberately toward Ian, who now stood at the center of the storm, wild-eyed, trembling, hair askew. Her once impeccable wrapper had come loose at the shoulder. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice quiet but cold. Ian looked at him, uncomprehending. "Era," he said. "What did you do to her?" She laughed then, high and broken. "She was just a shadow," she spat. "A weed. Like her mother. Always watching, always judging, never grateful." "What did you do?" he repeated. "She was supposed to eat it and sleep," Ian said. "That's all. Not this. Not this. You poisoned her." "She knew too much," Ian whispered. "Those herbs, those eyes. She saw everything. Just like her mother did before her." Tay stepped closer. "You killed her. She made herself the victim. Always walking around with her silence like a crown. I gave her a way out. A gentle one. A clean death." "No," said a voice beside them. They turned. Era stood at the center of the courtyard. Not a vision. Not a ghost. Her feet touched the earth, but her skin shimmered like moonlight on water. Her eyes glowed gently. Her wrap, soaked in blood, fluttered as if caught in wind none could feel. She walked slowly, silently between the scattered guests, past the fallen dog, past the burning cloth, past the shattered calabashes. No one could speak. No one could breathe. Ian dropped to her knees. "Era," she whispered, lips trembling. Era looked at her. Not with anger. Not with mercy. Just knowing. She passed Ian without a word. Tay bowed his head as she passed him, a single tear tracing his cheek. She walked until she reached the far side of the courtyard, where her father stood, alone. He had not moved. Not during the screams. Not during the fire. Not during the vomiting or the prayers. He had watched it all from his corner, as silent as he had been the day she died. Era stopped in front of him. He looked up slowly. Their eyes met. His lips parted. "I." But the words caught in his throat. She reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers left a streak of red on his palm, not blood, not paint, but something deeper. A mark that pulsed once, then faded into his skin. He bowed his head. And then she turned away. The white bird descended from the roof, circling once before landing on Era's shoulder. Its eyes glowed with the same light as hers. She looked once more at the guests, now silent and still. Then she vanished. The bird took flight. Only the wind remained. The wind howled across the village of Ire like a living thing, pulling at cloth, ripping through rooftops, rattling every door left ajar. The sky churned with a strange red hue, as though the sun had set backwards and stained the heavens with something deeper than light. All paths in the village led to one place, the ancient Irako tree. It stood taller than ever, yet something had changed. Its bark shimmered with dark veins pulsing slowly, like it had drunk too deeply of something forbidden. The ground beneath it was no longer still. A rumble began to rise, soft at first, a whisper in the roots, then louder, deeper, until the earth itself moaned. And then it split. A crack zigzagged through the soil, opening wide beneath the tree. Red light seeped upward, not like fire, but like blood with memory. The villagers who had dared to watch from a distance gasped and scattered, fleeing behind walls and trees. The white bird returned, circling above the tree like a watchful moon. From the split ground something began to rise. But not as she was. Her body emerged slowly, pulled upward by coiling vines that wrapped around her arms and waist like armor. Her feet touched the surface with no sound. Her skin was no longer brown but the color of wet bark and ember. Roots laced through her limbs like veins. Her eyes were no longer the gentle eyes of a girl. They burned crimson, molten and unblinking, holding centuries in their gaze. Her hair flowed like smoke. Her mouth, when it opened, spoke not with voice but with wind and thunder. "I am not she who was buried," she said. "I am she who remembers." And the wind bent in reverence. All at once, the guilty were pulled back to the courtyard as if by invisible hands. Adjua stumbled forward, ash streaked across her once perfect face, her eyes wild. Ian was dragged, knees scraping the earth, her wrapper torn. Bisola wept, her mouth too dry to scream. Their bodies resisted, but the ground did not yield. Tay walked slowly, unpushed, head lowered, his steps full of dread. Era stood tall beneath the tree, her shadow stretching across the entire compound. She raised one hand, vines spiraling from her wrist. Adjua. The name struck like thunder. Adjua whimpered. No. I was told to, Mother said. You poisoned with a laughing tongue, Era said. You mocked suffering. You stepped over graves and called it grace. Adjua screamed and turned to run, but the wind turned hot. Her skin cracked. Her feet stumbled. Then with no flame, no spark, she turned to ash. Slowly. Painfully. Her mouth stretched in one last cry before her form crumbled and scattered into the air. Era turned her gaze next. Ian. The stepmother met Era's eyes with none of her former pride. Her face collapsed into itself, years of command melting into terror. I did what mothers do, she cried. I protected what was mine. You murdered what you feared, Era said. You drank the life of a woman and spat it on her child. You buried truth and fed the bones to your greed. I only wanted safety, Ian whispered. Respect. Era lifted her hand. The roots beneath the Irako tree surged forward, slithering like serpents. They wrapped around Ian's ankles, her wrists, her waist. She screamed as they dragged her backward, deeper toward the cracking earth. Her fingers clawed at the soil, leaving trails of blood. The last thing the villagers saw was her mouth wide in horror before the ground swallowed her whole. Silence followed. Then Era turned to Bisola. The girl collapsed before a word was said, sobbing uncontrollably, face to the dirt, begging without breath. Era said nothing to her. Not yet. Then her eyes turned to Tay. He stood still. She approached him slowly, and the vines withdrew as she walked. Her face, beautiful, terrible, shimmered between the girl he once knew and something older than the land. Tay dropped to his knees. I knew, he said, voice thick. I saw the signs. I knew they hated you. I heard the whispers. And I said nothing. He lifted his face. I loved you. Quietly. But I let fear chain me. I was a coward. Era did not speak at first. Her red eyes searched his face. You could have spoken, she said. A word may have changed fate. I know, he said. I have dreamed of it every night. She stepped forward, laid her hand on his forehead. Her touch was warm but not comforting. Then you shall carry your guilt, she whispered. Let it be your compass. A mark bloomed where her fingers touched, a curved flame red and glowing faintly just above his brow. It did not burn, but it hummed with power. Do no harm to the innocent, she said. Speak when silence is murder. Tay bowed. I will. Era turned back to the tree. The ground settled. The sky cleared. The white bird landed beside her. She looked once more over the village, over the faces peeking through fences and from windows. No one else was named. No one else judged. And then, as the wind circled her feet and the vines drew back, Era stepped into the roots once more. Her body did not fall. It flowed, dissolving into red light and earth, her essence drawn back into the tree's heart. The crack closed. The Irako stood still. But the bark now bore a mark, a handprint red as flame. They say no feast has been held in Ire since that day. The drums that once echoed across the hills fell silent, their hides untouched. The mats that bore food were burned. The kitchen hearths, once the heart of celebration, now crackled only for daily meals, never for joy. And when strangers asked why the village held no weddings, no naming ceremonies, no harvest banquets, the elders would only say, the plates still bleed when laid on the table. It began with the utensils. Bowls, gourds, calabashes, each one stained with faint crimson rings that no water could wash. Even new ones, carved from fresh wood, wept red when food was served in them. Some said it was dye. Others claimed it was just superstition. Until a child licked her fingers after a wedding stew and fell screaming, clutching her throat. Her voice didn't return for weeks. That was the last time anyone tried. Instead, the villagers built a small shrine near the Irako tree, not too close but near enough for the wind to carry prayers. No one dared cut from that tree. Its roots still throbbed faintly when touched. Women knelt there at dusk, pressing their foreheads to the earth, whispering names they could no longer say aloud, of sisters betrayed, of stepdaughters broken, of mothers whose warnings had gone unheard. Era became more than memory. She became law. Mothers told their daughters, speak when your heart aches, or she will speak for you. Fathers, ashamed, avoided the shrine. But every year, on the night when the wind turned warm and bitter, a few brave men would kneel beneath the Irako and pour palm wine into the earth, hoping to be forgiven for sins they never confessed aloud. And Tay? He left the village. They say he became a wandering healer, traveling from one town to the next, carrying nothing but a satchel of herbs and the red mark on his forehead. He never stayed long. He never accepted coins. But he always helped the voiceless, the silenced, the bruised. Children in distant towns would point at him and whisper, "That's the man who spoke to a spirit and lived." They weren't wrong. In marketplaces and under moonlight, people told Era's story, of the gentle girl turned root and flame, who marked the wicked from within. Some said she could pass through walls. Others claimed she appeared in mirrors when lies were spoken at family tables. But all agreed on one thing. You do not eat from a cursed woman's plate. Not if you've wronged her. Because if you do, her blood will find your mouth. And it will not forgive.